Great. Thank you so much. I wanted to thank you folks for having me here today. My name's Karl Mayry. I have a small company called Through the Learning Glass, and our offices are located at Cranbrook Institute of Science on the third floor, which we call the penthouse. We have the best view in the entire campus, actually, which is great. And we have a staff of regular actually five people plus volunteers, so we're quite busy. Cranbrook is our home base, and it's our home museum, and we have a very close working relationship with Cranbrook, but we also work for other institutions as well, and we've renovated other museums and worked with the folks at DZS, Detroit Zoological Society, and we do a lot with Flat River, the Flat River Historical Museum in Greenville, Michigan, and those folks over there. But thanks to Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society for inviting me. I'm going to probably use us and me interchangeably because we are a team over at Learning Glass, and we've really enjoyed working with you folks, and we actually really do marvel at what you've accomplished in such a short amount of time with your museum. It's really an amazing work. So kudos to all of you. And also Cameron Wood told me to say hi. So I'm saying hi to you on his behalf over at Cranbrook. He's our Cranbrook Institute of Science collections manager, curator, I should say. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I apologize ahead of time. I like the sound of my own voice, so I'm going to talk a lot. And I'm going to be probably bouncing around a little bit. Let me share the screen first, and I'll kind of follow that up. Let's see, share screen. Let's see, where am I at? Here we go. And share. Let's see. Okay. Let's start the slideshow. Start from beginning. There we go. Okay. So this is my title slide. I used PowerPoint. Last couple of days I've been throwing some things together in PowerPoint for this presentation. And what's interesting is that when people ask me what I do, the responses I get when I tell them is either, oh, that's nice, or, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then, that usually leads to a ton of questions. So anyways, I'm kind of basing my presentation off of a lot of that interaction. So what I typically tell people when they ask me that question is my career is actually every third grader's dream job. And that is because I'm the guy that gets to build the dinosaurs. And at Cranbrook, we probably loop dinosaurs into our changing hall. We have a hall that changes its thematic with rental exhibits from all over the country, from display companies that rent them out, obviously. And we usually do them 3 to 6 months a year. They change out. So right now we have space at Cranbrook Institute of Science, which is really cool. You should come down and see it. Anyways, so what I wanted to do is put together, when I talked to Gina and the staff about a presentation, some of it was, some of the initial ideas were revolving around archaeology, and maybe the archaeology of Oakland County, which actually I've studied for a number of years, as I have an interest in archaeology, and I have a degree in archaeology actually from Oakland University. And my cognator, my specialty was in Native Americans of Michigan and the material culture here in Michigan. But what I elected to do is maybe widen it a little bit, because people, you're all here because you're affiliated in some way with the museum or interested in your local museum. So I thought, let's talk about all things museum and some archaeology thrown in. So when I say every third grader's dream job, one of my favorite things to do is when we have school groups come in is to watch them interact with exhibits that we've built around dinosaurs. And for what it's worth, we do a lot with paleontology at Cranbrook Institute of Science because we're a natural history museum. And these photographs are from an exhibit called Explore Lab, which is an outbuilding that used to be our nature center, just outside the actual museum itself. It's a smaller standalone building. It used to be known as the Bat Zone. But prior to that, it was a Ford Foundation Nature Center. But now it is called Explore Lab, and its theme will be changing, I think, sometime in August or in September. And we're going to move some of these exhibit pieces, components, to a new exhibit that we have coming in our changing hall. But this was built to be a 2-year run for what we call the stroller set, or the young kids, maybe toddlers, all the way up through 100 years old. So grandma, grandpa, or parents can bring young kids or 3rd graders or 5th graders or high schoolers, what have you, to this exhibit and get something out of it in some way. So if you look to the left, this is one of my favorite all-time conservation pieces. It's a hadrosaur trackway. And a funny story about this is I was vacationing in Tennessee, knowing that I had an exhibit that was going to be due in November, and I'd already started resourcing materials for this exhibit. And what I wanted to do is to find something that kids could actually touch. When you go to a museum, it's always, oh, you can't touch that. Don't touch that. Hands off, please. Signage everywhere. And my thinking is that one of our challenges is to get people, especially young people, interested in museums. We're up against video games, and we're up against all kinds of modern culture that really distract us away from our cultural heritage. And so if you can touch history, I think, because, we're all of us are in some way sensory learners. We, by sight, auditory, tactile, even taste, we learn. So I wanted kids to be able to touch this exhibit. So I found this trackway at the world's biggest knife store in Tennessee, and it needed some renovation. So we got a really good deal on it, and I renovated it, and we curated it, and we actually set it up on a stand, and it's actually touchable in this exhibit. In the same vein, we created a dig box. Kids love to dig around for things. We bought some really nice casts, urethane casts, and we put them in a dig box, a sandbox, if you will, so they can excavate. So a lot of this is hands-on learning, exploration, learning. So, for example, we've had several dinosaur exhibits that have done very, very well at Cranbrook Institute of Science. The last one that we ran was Doom of the Dinosaurs, Are We Next? And this is a quick sketch. A lot of times when exhibitors come in, they don't have enough material to fit our 5,000 plus square feet of changing hall. So a lot of times we have to kind of help them out. And, in this case, what you see here is we provided the barriers. We bought these really cool urethane rocks and put our labeling on some of the labeling, curatorial material actually on the urethane rock to kind of give it that paleontological feel, being a dinosaur digger, if you will. So people often ask me, what did dinosaurs cost? And this is an interesting story, because when I was working on that Explore Lab as a designer and partly curator, I was looking to find real dinosaur specimens, as I said before, that people could interact with, that they could touch, and that we're not going to worry about them wrecking or destroying, and that we could replace if we needed to, if that did happen. Long and short of it is, I'm trying to remember this fellow's name. He's a dinosaur hunter. And he works the Wyoming, Montana, Utah areas, fossil beds, on contract. He has to share with the property owners what he excavates, but he excavates it actually commercially. And they do this on contract. It is legal. And I was looking for it for this presentation, but he actually sends me a written, it looked like a diner check, with all the different, parts of the hadrosaur that he was going to sell us. And I think the total amount was like $3,500 for roughly 1/3 of a hadrosaur. I was going to pay about $3,500. And our goal was to put it on the wall to allow kids, over a silhouette that kids could touch, and, okay, here's a femur, here's its location on the dinosaur. We didn't end up taking that route because we actually ran out of room. Even during the design process, we realized we didn't have room for it, but what a great concept. And, these things are actually out there. We also renovated iconic stegosaur at Cranbrook Institute of Science. This thing appeared at Cranbrook Institute of Science somewhere around the 1980s. We looked for archival information on it. We didn't have that much. We do know that it was from a company out of New York that it was purchased. It has a steel frame and it has a fiberglass body. And it had been lent to the Detroit Zoo probably in the 90s. I think it disappeared from Cranbrook's campus for a couple of years. It's outdoors. You can come see it. It's just outside the Institute of Science near the parking lot. And what we ended up doing is it was in really disrepair. It, through the years, it had gotten repainted a few times with some house paint. It cracked, and the sun is very damaging to anything outside. So it had some large fissures in it. So our team got together, and Cranbrook raised some extra money, and we were able to renovate this wonderful little landmark of a stegosaur, and it's a life-size one. And in fact, what's really cool about this exterior exhibit is that it's surrounded by ginkgo trees, which is, we think, the forest that this thing would have, at least paleontological, through evidence, we know it was kind of hanging around in those forests, that kind of biome. So Cranbrook planted a lot of those trees around this thing, so it almost looks like it's in its natural habitat, which is really kind of unique. Here's some more stuff that we built. This was from an exhibit in 2013, and this was about Laramidia, which was the western half of the United States that was separated by a large channel of water from the eastern section of the United States, as the coasts were as the continents were forming still. So this was Dinosaurs Lost World exhibit, and you can see we did a version of a dig box that was actually a cutout skeleton. Is for younger kids. I used to call that the hockey rink because we had to put barriers, plastic barriers up, because plastic soil was flying everywhere all over the hall. We were finding it in the strangest places, so we had to kind of contain it a little bit by adding these polycarbonate. To me, they look like hockey shields. On the left was an engineering project, which is a crate that shakes, and the lid opens slowly, and up rises this raptor dinosaur head. And it took us, our volunteer engineers helped us design and build this, and it's a lot of fun. We put it out at Halloween now, but we had built it for this exhibit. And just a funny sidebar to this, I get a little carried away as a designer sometimes, and I actually designed it so that when the head pops up, the lid pops up, the head comes up slowly. If you stand there for a minute, the head lurches forward rapidly, like in a snapping motion, like he's coming to get you. And unfortunately, it scared way too many kids, so we actually had to get rid of that camshaft that controlled that part of the exhibit. So maybe having a little too much fun at that point in time. So now it's a little bit more conservative, I would say. So anyways, people ask me all the time when they find out that I'm an exhibit designer builder and I'm the guy that builds the dinosaurs, how did this come to be? What does it take? Did you go to school for that? Well, you can go to school for that. There are different avenues that you can take professionally. I came about it through a culmination of life experience. I worked in the design and graphics, architectural, engineering, and signage industry for many years. Combine that with a later in life degree in archaeology, anthropology, and then also not being a guy who watches football on Sundays, but rather goes to rock quarries. It kind of just seems to be a natural fit. So anyways, we have a lot of fun at Cranbrook Institute of Science. My dance partner on the left was a donation from a private estate to Cranbrook Institute of Science. It's obviously it's a taxidermied baboon, and he's actually on display right now in Life on Earth, which is our brand new permanent exhibit. The one on the right is a picture that it was actually a selfie I accidentally took. I was reaching for my phone on the top of a ladder, which is really high up, and this is a megalodon shark behind me. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is a modern great white shark behind me. I'm a big fan of Jaws. So when I accidentally snapped that picture and I looked at it, I said, hey, that actually kind of works a little bit. That's actually not bad. So I hung on to that. But that was an exhibit from Florida State University, FSU sponsored Megalodon exhibit that we had, I think in 2016. That was a real fun one. Also, I'm an avid scuba diver, Michigan scuba diver. I've been scuba diving in Michigan for many, many years, since the early 80s. That's my dive partner, Neil. We used to call each other the Bookend Divers because we bought exactly the same gear because both of us wanted it and we flipped for it and we couldn't decide. So we bought the exact same gear. So we're kind of the Bookend Divers here. We went on a lot of dive trips together. We dove the Great Lakes together and the rivers extensively. And there's a lot of history under those waves, especially in the rivers. I can't tell you how much amazing things there are to see in the Great Lakes that a lot of people don't get to see. So we actually designed and created an exhibit in 2012, which I think was a really successful exhibit for us. We did our own self-build, about 1,500 square feet of exhibitry in our changing hall that was a companion exhibit to The Abyss, which is about the deep sea, deep ocean, including the Titanic, or the finding of the Titanic, in the 1980s. And so on display, I was really on the left, if you see, there's a piece of artwork that I actually had commissioned from an artist friend of mine. And this is the Regina, and I don't know, Regina or Regina, however you want to say it. It was actually a victim of the storm of 1913, which was a very, very important historical event that destroyed the Great Lakes shipping for quite a few years, and it affected the national economy. In 1913, we had a very large storm that was like essentially an inland hurricane, and it affected all of the Great Lakes, and it took down a lot of major ships, the Regina being one package steamship in Port Sanilac. And then, of course, I had to put my dive gear on display. Speaking of archaeology, so in talking about underwater, there's a lot of underwater Native American sites in Michigan, and we've dove quite a few of them, and they are listed. You can look them up on the database. And I know Dan Harrison is here with us. I saw his name. Hello, Dan. It's good to be with you. Dan Harrison is a nautical archaeologist, and so I would love to compare notes with you someday, Dan. I know you've done a ton of research on shipwrecks and sites. So, and I've worked with Dan before, and Dan and I are going to work together soon on another project for Cranbrook. But anyways, this stuff that I'm showing you here is actually very recent, and it's shoreline material from a site that I worked on in the 1990s. And wrote quite a bit about, reported it to the state of Michigan. So it is an archaeological site, Mackinac County. It's very close to my parents, and it's a very rare site. It's a rock cliff shelter site on the shore of Lake Huron, and it's a very ancient site. It runs from probably the early Archaic all the way through late woodland, possibly, I think, through historic contact period. And some of the materials that you see before you, the pictures that I shot these, I think, in September or August, because they're building on the site. The site has actually now essentially been completely destroyed, which is very heartbreaking to me. But we did luckily run some excavations through Oakland University. MSU did some research there, as well as Superior State College. And a lot of information has been preserved from that site, a lot of beautiful cultural elements from there. What you're looking at here on the left is a chert lithic tool, stone tool, if you will. In the middle is a net sinker. So because it's right off the shoreline, you would expect that the folks were fishing, and they were. It's a very shallow area of water, so it would be ideal for netting in the shallows. And so that rock would have been carved on purpose to hold the bottom of the net in place. And on the right-hand side is a piece of pottery, ceramic. That vessel, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert in the ceramic arena, but what I was told by an expert at Michigan State is that seems to be a tradition that wouldn't necessarily be expected there. It's actually Iroquoian tradition, decorative motif, if you will, which is on the rim. The rim is very, very diagnostic, and the patterning on ceramics is very, very diagnostic as to culture many times. Also, now I'm jumping to another museum. This one's outside of Grand Rapids. This is the Flat River Historical Museum. and they renovated their museum starting in 2019, and we're still working on some elements of it even today. We're mostly done now with the renovation of their main galleries. And one of the main galleries that they wanted was a Native American gallery because they have extensive Native American history. There have been a lot of archaeological digs and studies in the surrounding farmlands and around the river. And it was a really large Native American presence there in Greenville and in the Flat River region. And so it was a major watershed. It would have, given the folks a lot of, sustaining goods so that they could, thrive in that area, and they did. They're really extensive archaeological sites. So what we did was we created a wigwam in one of the galleries, which is one of my favorite projects, and I put it here because it is really a tremendous heritage piece, and it took a lot of time to do, and it was actually built traditionally by a fellow named Jim Miller, who is he's now retired from this, but he was an expert in Native American art, and being partly Native American himself, followed the traditional methods of making wigwams or canoes and stone tools and baskets. A really tremendous person. He donated a lot to the museum as well, which is great. So there's a lot of other things that he did, but he built this wigwam traditionally, and it was really fascinating watching him do it. He had to age, like the bark that was used, the cedar bark, could only be harvested during a certain time of the year, and then it had to be left outdoors for a while to age correctly before it could be used. So there's things like that. So the technology, in modern times, we think it's quite simplistic. I would tell you that there's a lot of technology, a lot of knowledge and effort that goes into this. I could not build something like this. It's really quite an art. So a lot of times in the exhibit business and in the museum world, we say it's a really big world. And if you come to our collections department, you'll see why. We run out of room very, very rapidly with things that we collect or take in. We have to be very careful the museum has to be very careful what it accepts, because we simply just don't have all the space for the very big world that we live in. And if we could take everything, we would, but we just, space is a premium always in museums. And it's not just Cranbrook, it's every museum has that issue with its collections. What do we take? What can we take? What should we take, or what should we not take? I'm going to jump to a very, very big world, jump to the DZS Polk Penguinarium. So we were hired in as a consultant, design consultant, then eventually a fabricator for all the exhibitry in the Polk Penguinarium in 2015. We started working with them in 2014, then 2015, we started designing for it. And in 2016 of April, the Penguinarium launched. It opened its doors to way more people than they thought were going to attend. I think they way underestimated the attendance. It was a massive attendance. I think within 8 months, more than 1.4 million people had come through those doors to visit the Penguinarium. And the funny thing is that the thing that I appreciate most about it is when I tell them that I was involved in the project, I tell anyone I was involved in the project, they always say to me, what exhibits? Because genuinely that was designed so that the penguins are the star, and you could walk right up to the penguins. So if you look at the lower right, on the left-hand side is a little model we built and I shot on my desktop using flashlights. If you look at the right side, that's the actual finished product. That's the real deal. And so you can see in the habitat, if any of you have ever been there, you could walk right up to the penguin, right up to the glass. I mean, they're less than if you got right up to the barrier, you're less than a half inch away from a penguin. And that's a pretty up close experience. To me, that's an amazing exhibit design. And it worked really, really well. People would crowd those windows, those barriers, to get a look at those penguins.
And the smell greatly improved from the old habitat as well.
Oh, the smell alone.
Yeah.
I think they're still back in the old one. I've been trying to keep up with what's been going on, but they had some engineering problems with the original structure, and it's been closed now for a while. And because of COVID, they've not been able to get it reopened. So hopefully they can do that soon. Also in that same vein, since we did all 3 floors of, actually it's more like 5 levels throughout the entire facilities, one of the really cool exhibits that we did, and one of my personal favorites, and the reason why I threw it on here, was Shackleton's Endurance. And so it was in the opening gallery. When you walk in the main entrance, you look to the right, there's a whole module dedicated to Shackleton and his ship, the Endurance, that was locked in the ice and then eventually destroyed, and it became a survival story, an amazing one. They didn't lose any men when they should have all probably perished, and they survived. The Endurance model that you see here was actually obtained from South America. We had to search everywhere to find a model of the Endurance that we could actually get done in the amount of time that we had. We found a pre-manufactured one from artisans in South America, and it took about a month and a half to ship. And when it arrived, you see on the box, it arrived in perfect condition. I did not expect that, but it arrived in perfect condition, and we've got it in its vitrine, and it looks gorgeous to this day. It's a beautiful, beautiful, highly detailed ship model. And I got to tell you, the price tag was shockingly expensive. So, but I can imagine what it would have taken to build that. It was just, it was an incredibly detailed model. So, in 2016, after we built and installed the exhibitry for the Poke Penguinarium, I had a little cardiac issue, and it was related to being up, 18 hours, 20 hours a day trying to get this exhibit in on time. And I got my surgeon comes into the hospital room and says, okay, it's time to take that retirement job. And, what you're doing is too stressful. You've got to slow down. How about try teaching? And when I say that to the teachers that I know, the laughter that it elicits is just awesome, because I also took that teaching job, and now I understand why they were laughing. My job as an exhibits designer, builder, all things exhibits, is way easier than teaching. Teaching is no retirement job. And if there's any teachers here, you know exactly what I mean. But it was a job that I loved. I did it for a few years at Huron Valley High School, teaching design, digital photography, interior design, everything that was basically related to what we do in exhibits. So I did that for a couple of years and went back to Cranbrook. I didn't ever really leave Cranbrook, or I didn't leave Learning Glass. I hired a manager to take on most of the daily duties while I was in the classroom. But in that vein, what I'd like to discuss, just showing you these photographs, is the thing that thrills me the most when we put an exhibit out, especially one that we design and build ourselves, is watching people interact with it. And I know, Gina, I know your staff over there, you folks must have done that when I'm sure you, in rapt attention, when people came in to see your new exhibits that you spent so much time and I know so much effort working on, and so much creativity, that's the reward. When you watch people interact with your exhibit, that's the payoff. It's there's nothing like that to me. So, for example, on the left side is, what was this exhibit called? I'm trying to remember. It was about, Sight, Light, and Illusion was the name of this exhibit. It was a companion exhibit to National Geographic in our changing hall. It was all about sight, human sight, animal sight, and comparatives and such. So the fellow on the left is looking at the range of vision for a hawk who has great vision. And then on the right, of course, we used optics, trying to explain how eyeglasses work and how, our vision is corrected by using optics. So, and this was all hands-on, the kid could slide that optic back and forth, and the other, the hawk vision, kind of, you could spin and look at different targets. It was a really cool little exhibit. But the payoff for me is watching people interact. Did that exhibit work? Did it not work? And many times I've been disappointed when I've designed something, or we've designed something and we built it and we think, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be perfect. Everybody's going to love this. And no, nothing. Whereas the more simple ones, the ones that we think, that's pretty simple, those are the ones that are the big hits. So sometimes there's no rhyme and reason as to what the general public's going to love. So in that spirit, and teaching is very much the same way. We sometimes have visitors at Cranbrook Institute of Science. I've also been an amateur herpetologist since I was about 7 years old. And all the way through college, I had reptiles. And this particular fella was a visitor in one of our events, and I just lizards are just amazing. So I was having a little bit of fun with this guy. And for what it's worth, these experiences all lead up to what I do in exhibits, because eventually I'm going to be dealing with reptiles, herpetology in some fashion. So I was asking him some advice up close, and he whispered in my ear a few important things about, herpetology. So people ask me all the time, how does one get into that field? How do you, what is it that you would get into the museum business and work with dinosaur bones? And my answer always is, well, if you like really old stuff, then you should probably be involved in a museum in some way. You can volunteer, or you can work, you can find a job. So what I would love to do is tell you a really quick story about a really creepy exhibit that we did. And when I say creepy, I mean that in the most austere, kind way, but it's still creepy. Creepy's creepy. And what we did was we had a rental exhibit at Cranbrook on Egypt, on King Tut's tomb, which was in the early, around the turn of the century, was a big, massive find, of this treasure-laden tomb of the boy king. And I think the exhibit was called King Tut, Wonderful Things from the Boy's Tomb. And it's actually, I think, now permanently housed in Arizona at this time. And it was a great little exhibit. So we had to, unfortunately, it didn't fill the entire hall. So our team had to brainstorm, what can we do as a companion exhibit to, mummies? And that's kind of an easy one, actually. And what we came up with was a small module called The Grateful Dead. And what the discussion was, what the overall exhibit was, is that mummies can be found on every continent. It's not just an Egyptian thing. And that funerary practices are very interesting. They're very fascinating, how we treat and revere our dead, our deceased. So this particular set of photographs here is a foam head, the wig heads, and it was carved and treated with various things to make it look like Seti II. He's got a very famous mummified visage. When you look up mummies or Google mummies, his face generally appears first. So we kind of replicated that for the part of the exhibit. We also had a rare opportunity to show ancient Chinese tombs, which are really amazing. They rival Egypt in every way. A lot of bronze goods, and actually predate a lot of the Egyptian stuff. So for example, the suit on the left is actually a jade armor suit, a burial suit for what we think is a person of royalty in China, ancient China. The rest of the stuff on the right was a small collection from a private collector in the Detroit area, who graciously donated stuff for us to show for a few months. And those are all tomb goods, burial goods. And the fact is that we didn't, in this Egyptian exhibit that we had, King Tut does not travel. It's not traveled. I'm not sure it ever traveled. Maybe little bits and pieces of it have, but it's in Cairo and it doesn't leave. And so, everything that we had in our Tut exhibit was a replica, very nicely done replicas, but replicas nonetheless. So we were able to actually show folks, the real thing with the Chinese pieces. And moving along, so we had 5 different modules for the different continents. And one of the more fascinating ones is, Central and South America. There's a lot of natural and man-made mummies there. And on the right-hand side, I had some really talented students at Lakeland High School in our design department. And I challenged them. I said to them, if you can design me something, I'm going to give you some criteria and some material. If you can design something that looks great, I'll put it on display. So all of our banners in this exhibit were designed by students at Lakeland High School in a graphic arts program. I think 5 different students, 5 different banners. They were all they all had a very great look to them. And I was very proud to show them off. And then when we took them down, I gave them to the kids. I said, here, put them on your bedroom wall. You actually had an exhibit at Cranbrook Institute of Science. So, but we get to the really funny part and the interesting part, I think. And the funny part of it is this, that well, I'll hold the funny part for a half second because I think I need to give it a little preface. In North America, when we look at Egypt and we think of Egyptian, funerary customs, they basically dissect the body, they fill it with, various things, seal it back up, take out the main organs, put them in jars, yada, yada, yada. Seems very foreign and very odd to us, right? Well, actually, North American funerary practices are just as interesting and strange to us if we're not familiar. And there were some practices that occurred starting in England around the Elizabethan period when photography started to become affordable. It was no longer experimental and people were doing photography for families. And it was originally only for the wealthy could afford it, but then it started to gain in popularity, became affordable. That being said, people didn't take pictures often. You had to hire a photographer with all this equipment. He'd have to haul it all over and set it all up. And then he'd have to take the lens off, take the lens cap off and expose the glass plate for up to 5 minutes, sometimes 8 minutes. You had to sit very still. And so an outgrowth of this was a lot of families would lose a person that they didn't have photos of. They would call the photographer and say, hey, can you come photograph our deceased member because we want something to remember them by? And so the photographer oftentimes would have to travel overland and by carriage, and it would take days, if not weeks. And so they would try their best to preserve the deceased loved one until the photographer could arrive. And many photographers actually acted like morticians. They actually prepared the body for photography. So there was some real interesting outgrowths to that in the actual funerary industry that we have today is an outgrowth from history. And on the right-hand side, the folks at Wayne State University's Mortuary Sciences were kind enough to lend us some of their personal museum pieces. They actually have a little museum in their building, in their lecture hall area. Of tools from the past. These things are around the Civil War period. And so a lot of tools of the undertaker we were able to display. And so the interesting thing is that these tintype photographs of these decedents, these poor folk that died, and many times they were children. Influenza was a massive problem, before science could get a hold of that. And a lot of kids died during these massive influenzas, some of these pandemics, and they would be photographed. And we didn't treat it that way at Cranbrook, of course, but I was buying tintype photographs, daguerreotypes as well, and some of these old photographs of people to put in the exhibit. And they were not exactly easy to find, but we did find a few. And it was Christmas Eve. I'm sitting on my iPhone, on my iPad, and I'm buying some of these things through various vendors. My mother-in-law asked me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm working." She goes, "You're working Christmas Eve?" I said, "Yeah, well, I have a deadline and it's kind of fun too. I'm having fun doing this." She goes, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm actually buying photographs of people who have died." And she just looks at me very seriously and she says, "You're a very odd man." And to this day, it's still one of my favorite responses, because she would be right. Who would think about buying these kinds of photographs on Christmas Eve, no less. But I found it very fascinating, very interesting. And there's not a lot of original research on this material. There's one published book, which I happen to be able to get a hold of. It's a very, very fascinating topic. If you ever have a chance to look it up, it's referred to as Memento Mori. It's worth your time. It's very fascinating history. And while it seems macabre, I would submit to you, after learning about it and writing this exhibit, you learn that it's really not macabre. You actually have a whole different point of view afterwards. You come out of it thinking about this completely different. I have a lot of sympathy for these folks. So what a hard time. What a terrible thing. Anyways, we're back to that ship, and misplaced piece there. So, museum people are always boring, right? This is a thing that I hear. It's like, oh, how boring is that? And you know what? No, we're not boring at all. We get to spend a lot of time researching and doing some really fun and amazing things. And it's never, ever, ever boring. So Dan Harrison will remember this. This is a project that I worked with Dan on. Dan brought to us. Detroit Historical Society actually introduced us to Dan, and then he was working on a cannon that was found in the Detroit River by a Detroit police dive team. And this was sort of the outcome. This is at Dawson. The cannon that we actually worked on, helped Dan to conserve, is on now permanent display. And during our conservation efforts, we actually put it in a tank of water and with some washing sodium in it, and ran a electrical current through it, which actually helps chemically remove rust and scale corrosion from the cannon gently and chemically, so that you don't damage the metal, don't damage the cannon. And in that process, we uncovered quite a few markings. My all-time favorite was on the trunnion, which is the part that holds the cannon to the carriage, sort of like the swivel pin. You can see it. It looks like it's, you can see it on the lower photograph. And on that trunnion was a marking stamped letter H. And Dan was actually able to research, where that was from. I think it was the Hall family or the Hall group that manufactured the cannon that casted it. So we actually uncovered that during electrolysis. We also would pull this thing out of that tank of water on the display floor, bring it up outside of our gift shop, and lower it down onto the floor, onto mats, and then give the general public toothbrushes. And they would actually help us brush away and do the conservation work. So we spent many hours doing that with the general public as an interactive piece. So this cannon became a very important interactive piece for the museum. It was a very popular exhibit, and then eventually ending at Dawson on public display. Really kind of a neat piece to be involved with. And we are, by the way, going to have another cannon soon at Cranbrook Institute of Science. This one's not British, this one's going to be French. And for example, if you notice, the last couple of slides that we've talked about have great little stories attached to them. And so when we design and look at a museum topic, the number one thing that you want to have is a story. Story leads the way. Without that type of context, it just becomes things that you look at and it's not as interesting. A story, everybody always wants to hear a good story. So again, that cannon, here's another shot of that cannon. And that cannon, and Dan wrote about it, published about it. The fact is that he thinks that and I think a lot of people agree with him, that during the War of 1812, the British leaving the fort took all their ordnance and the cannons and dragged them out onto the ice just so that the Americans couldn't get them. So instead of hauling them all to Ohio, you can imagine trying to haul a nearly 2,000 pound chunk of iron to Ohio. No, thank you. So, they landed in the river, and there's several more down there that they know of. The Detroit police on a recovery dive located it, and they wrapped a chain around it, and with a tow truck, they pulled this cannon out of the river. And one of the interesting stories is the crew, when we had the tank all set up and ready to go, we custom fabricated it. We're lowering this 2,000 pound cannon into this tank of water. And I had noticed that one of the chain links, because we were using their original, they lent us the lift for the cannon. It was an engine hoist, if you will. And it was held by chains. And as we're lowering, as the chain unwraps, I noticed that one of the chain links was worn away, because I think probably from dragging it across the pavement, it wore away one of the sides of the chain link, and it was about a 1/16 of an inch piece of steel actually holding that whole cannon up. And that was, do you lower it quickly and just get it lowered into place, or do you swing it down to the floor as quickly as you can? And the latter ruled. We got it to the floor and then changed it to nylon straps. So you got to sometimes pay really close attention. I don't even know that, I would have been normally paying that close of attention to the chain, but I was so worried because of the weight. That would have been one big catastrophic event had that link broke. So, Here's a neat little story. This is going back to Flat River Historical. We have an exhibit, which is a very celebrated exhibit at Cranbrook Institute of Science in our anthropology area, called Story of Us. And it talks about the material culture across material goods across many cultures and what we have in common as human beings, and seen through our material culture and or beliefs. And we have a center exhibit, which is called a Pepper's Ghost. And a lot of people think that it's a hologram. And it's not a hologram. It's actually really old technology of using what they call smoke and mirrors. It uses a mirror and it reflects an image so that it looks like it's a ghost in 3D. And so for Flat River, the Flat River Historical Museum, they have a stage. And we didn't have the amount of space that Cranbrook has, so we created a tube and we shaped a scrim sort of in a round fashion. And we projected from the backside of it. And what you see here is on the right, you see sort of one of our tests using the shape scrim, making a Pepper's Ghost. And what you're seeing is a narrator from a period of time in Greenville's history. So I think they had 5 or 6 different narrators from 5 or 6 different time periods. They used local actors, local stage production to film, and they wrote scripts for this. It was quite an undertaking. So on the left-hand side, you'll see I had a film crew come in with a green screen, and we actually filmed the narrator so that they could become the ghosts of Greenville. And on a shaped scrim, it really does look amazing. It does look like they have 3 dimension to them. They don't look flat. It's really kind of an interesting effect. So even then with exhibitry, it's not just about things. It's not about ship models necessarily. It's not about dinosaur bones. Sometimes it's about technology. Sometimes it's about the story and the story to be told. This particular fella is interesting story about this, I'll tell you, is that he was the head of the Danish Historical Museum locally, and really big within the the museum group within Greenville, Michigan. And unfortunately, he succumbed to COVID, and he was one of our narrators. And the museum opened back up, and they had a grand opening for the theater section showing these different narrators, and his family was in attendance. And I don't think anybody told them that he was one of the narrators. So they see him in 3 dimension, after he'd died. And so it was really, an emotional time for them, seeing him in 3 dimension and narrating for, 2.5 minutes on his expertise, the Danish group that came into Greenville. So that was an interesting, little human experience within the exhibits industry. It was a lot of fun filming him, and he was very, very a really great person to work with. Going back to, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but these are kind of, fun little stories from exhibits, in developing and building exhibits and working in museums. And one particular item that's been one of my favorites is we took in the Polk Penguinarium, there's a series of ramps that you walk down to get down to the lower floor. And that ramp is actually above it is a 4D experience. You have a 3-story high experience of being on the deck of the Endurance as it's rocking and making its way through the Antarctic oceans. And below that, you have brass portholes and reclaimed barnwood that's supposed to look like ship straking. We bought a lot of used barnwood, 100-plus-year-old barnwood that had to be cut into very thin strips, treated with chemicals, and then installed so that it would look like ship straking. And then, of course, you have brass portholes that has video screens behind it. And the video screens have images from Antarctic life. So you had everything from a giant squid, to jellyfish, to various mammals swimming up to the screen and swimming past the screen. And one of my favorite comments watching people go through there, I spent a lot of time watching people interacting with these portholes, is a lot of kids would say, boy, those tanks behind there must be very big. So they thought that because the video resolution was so good on those screens and the footage was so great that it looked like, you were looking into a tank. So, as a whale swims by, they're thinking that it's actually an aquarium window. And I love that part, because that to me is a slam dunk in that interpretive, that you would think it looks so good that you think it's actually real. And the only other thing is, if you have a brass porthole in a wooden sailing ship and you're looking at animals underwater, you have big problems. So shout it from the rooftops. That's sort of what we say in the exhibits industry, because you have to have a good story to tell, and then you need to shout it from the rooftops. You need to engage the public. You need to get them involved and interested in what you're showing and what you're doing. That's a big mantra in our office. You know, we've done a lot of, and going back just to real quickly to Oakland University, my affiliation with them, I was able to a few years ago, because that's you know, my alma mater. We actually worked with them on restoring a historical piece in the rear part of the campus. I think it's off Walton. It's a barn they now use for functions and rentals, but it was a plus 100-year-old barn, and we did a lot of the graphic work on the side of the barn. That was fun to paint on really rough-hewn barn wood, but we were part of that crew on that historic renovation, and we really appreciated that opportunity. Currently at Cranbrook, we're working on multiple projects, and a lot of them are really engaging and a lot of fun. The center one is a Ceraris trilobite. I'm a big trilobite. I'm a big paleontology, invertebrate paleontology fan. And I love collecting in quarries in Michigan. There's many collecting opportunities for fossils in Michigan. And as you know, Michigan was underwater most of the time in its history, in its ancient history. So you have a lot of really great marine fossils. The Ceraris is one of my favorites. So we turned that into a great big graphic outside our collections area on a big gray blank wall. We thought we would dress it up a little bit. So that's new. If you come to the Institute of Science, you can see that. On the left-hand side, we're actually, there's Elon Musk and the Virgin Corporation and many others are currently working on a zero carbon emissions transportation system. And it's supposed to compete with the maglev trains, the high-speed maglev trains in Japan, for example. Those trains run at about 356 miles an hour. They're bullet trains, high-speed bullet trains. Elon Musk has an open source project, which means, you know, any engineer or company are welcome to come in and build off of what the information they have to try to do this for the good of humanity. And what it is it's called the Hyperloop. And what a Hyperloop is, it's a train concept, a subway train concept, more or less is where it started. It started actually back in the 1800s, early 1800s, in fact, where you know, they were working on trains and always trying to come up with a newer, better train. And a developer suggested that use air pressure to move a train in a vacuum tube. And essentially that's what this is. So we're working on a model of the Virgin Tesla Hyperloop. And we hope to have that installed within the next month or so in our motion gallery. So it's a lot of fun to play with. So on the left-hand side, you see those vacuum tubes where there's no air pushing back against the moving object, and it's the burst of air is propelling the object forward. Almost like, I guess you could liken it to a bank tube. When you go to the bank and you go through the drive-through and you put the tube in and it gets sucked up through a vacuum, it's very much the same concept. It's very, very similar, except this would be a train, and there are versions running, there are model versions now running out west, test versions, if you will. The train runs at 750 miles an hour. That is fast. So also then on the right-hand side, we're looking at re-envisioning some areas of the Institute of Science, giving it a refresh. So we've been working on that for the last probably 8 to 9 months. And we're still a ways out from doing anything on that, but we're looking at updating many of our galleries that we have. I wanted to take just a second, a shout out to folks with ADHD, because I'm one of those. And when I was teaching, it became more important to me to bring this message out, but I like to bring it out in exhibitry. I like to bring it out in with what I do. We actually built the Detroit Zoo Polk Penguinarium exhibitry within very few months, and it was a very large scale project. And part of the reason why it got done, part of the reason why we were able to do it, because I didn't know any better that I couldn't do it. And that, thank you to ADHD. So ADHD is I think, and I would tell my students this because I had many who had this, that it's a superpower if you learn to harness its good characteristics. It's a superpower. So I use it a lot. I harness it a lot for what I do in exhibits. And it's a lot of creative folk actually happen to suffer from, well, suffer, I shouldn't even say suffer. I don't suffer from ADHD. I enjoy ADHD. I just try not to drive other people too crazy with it. And sometimes that does happen. But anyways, one of the things that we tried to harness in design is that how can you harness some of those abilities that you have with attention deficit, and because you're so creative, how can we harness that to be a benefit? And we do, and we came up with many exercises for that. And I thrive on ADHD to make exhibits that much better, I think. By the way, I try to save everyone from too much copy, because I'm the kind of guy that will walk up to a panel, and if it's got 8 paragraphs, I'm not reading that. So the mantra is to try to, keep it more visual, more symbolic, and a lot less text heavy, if you will. So in that way, ADHD is a gift. Here's a project that I want to talk about for a minute. This is, and I think I have another slug for this further down the presentation. In the Penguinarium, they decided that they wanted electronic labeling. There is a large 20-foot tall incurvate wall, and is a viewing wall, so you can see the penguins underwater. It's massive and it's impressive, and it's about 8 inches thick of acrylic. And you can see the entire habitat, or that side of the habitat, from an underwater point of view. And on that underwater point of view, they wanted to be able to put facts about penguins on that acrylic wall, shine it on the acrylic wall. And they likened it to what's called a HUD, a heads-up display. A heads-up display are found in aircraft, in cars, in high-end cars, that will project on your windshield to show you a map or your phone call or whatever, but only the driver can see it from one vantage point. They wanted a system like that on the upper end of the acrylic incurvate wall. So you had to correct for the curve. You had to figure out how you're going to project it onto the glass without it ghosting or shadowing or blurring, and to be able to see it from multiple angles, not just one particular angle. So in that way, it wasn't really a heads-up display. It was more of a graphic user interface, or something we call a GUI. And so we had to design a system that you had to crawl up into the framework, because it was sort of an add-on. It wasn't planned during the initial phases of the building planning. So there wasn't really a lot of space to work in. So we had to work in this really tight space. So if you look at on the left lower hand side, you can see a projector, one of the projectors hanging. That's how much space we had to work with above some of the water tubes in the suspended ceiling, to get this installed. And actually, we ended up actually getting it installed right where it needed to be, but with a very, very finite amount of room and a lot of prayers. We also had to install specialty screens to soften and change the image so that it would look good on the acrylic in its final form. So that was a very challenging, technologically challenging project to do for exhibitry, using optics, using optical engineering, and of course, just some really great fabrication, tricky fabrication, if you will. To be creative is human. Getting back to the ADHD thing for just a second, in exhibitry, everybody has a gift. Not everybody is necessarily a graphics person. On our team, not everybody is a graphics person. Sometimes we have people who are more auditorily gifted, or tactile, and everybody has a gift to bring to the team. And that's why I love our team. We have a young team, and we also have an old team. I have volunteers who are retired engineers, and they bring a lot of skill and tactile and, just general amazing knowledge in electrical and mechanical engineering. And so everybody has a gift. And when I was teaching my high school classes, that was one of the things that I always, tried to run home to the kids, is that, what's your gift? Find your gift. So in the process of designing exhibits, it's always interesting, because we want to tell a story, and if you have a good story to tell, you're 3/4 of the way there. Now you got to put the nuts and bolts to it. And what's interesting is people always wonder, what is the process to designing an exhibit? Well, it's multifaceted because we deal with physical items, specimens. Some you can touch, some you can't. Interactive pieces, maybe using optics or a push button or a touch screen. And then, of course, the design itself. And you have to integrate these all together. And it does really start on sometimes on a napkin. So the centerpiece that you see here is a scrap piece of paper. I think I pulled that out of a trash can and I started sketching. It just caught me at the moment. I had my favorite ink pen, grabbed a scrap piece of paper, started sketching. And then eventually, you know, this is one module of, I think, 13 modules that we designed for this Explore Lab dinosaur experience. And that's how it starts. What you see in the center. Eventually, if you go out, if you look at the left, we hired a animator. Well, not an animator because it wasn't moving. We hired an illustrator, if you will. And the illustrator, you know, was really tremendous at dinosaur illustrations. And you can see some of the process notes. I think this one was on my iPhone, and we were going back and forth on changes that needed to be made. And that's sometimes how it's done. Well, I'm at a stoplight. I sketch up really quickly. There, you got to do this. Because a lot of times we're dealing with deadlines too. So, and if you look at the right-hand side, that's sort of a finished piece, one of the finished modules for a dinosaur experience. And you'll see this will be in our hall in the fall, in our changing hall. So you'll be able to interact with this particular exhibit. Also, that dig box also starts very much the same way. You know, we find what materials are available and we fit them into real rough sketches, and I share those rough sketches with staff, who then take it to the next level and they do a little bit more refinement. So it's always a system. Creating exhibitry is always a system of refinement. You start very, very rough, very simple, stick figures, if you will. And then it just keeps getting bumped and refined and bumped and refined. And hey, how about this? And then we meet on it and say, well, what if we changed this and did this, or this isn't available, but this is. And it's a process, but usually ends up very, very well. One of our newest exhibits is outside our changing hall at Cranbrook, and Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur. Actually lived before the dinosaurs, and he's a proto-mammal. And this particular one's been on display a few times, but he found himself in our storage area, and I just thought, no, he doesn't belong in storage. So we found a little out-of-the-way spot that we could actually use to show the general public that Dimetrodons are just very cool. So he's outside our changing hall, and you can come visit him pretty much any time. So museum work is not always available to us. Museum work kind of, you know, will dry up for a period of time, and then we'll get a giant project and sink our teeth into that, be busy for 2 years with it or a year. And then of course it'll kind of go back to low ebb. So in that time period, a lot of times we focus on corporate clients. Corporate clients do seek us out for some of the work that we do. This is one that we did in Clarkston. One of them, we did 7 thematic meeting areas for this company, a wealth management company. Lower left-hand corner is SpaceX, as a SpaceX theme room. So we fabricated the wall, the cloud structure, the lighting cloud structure with a porthole, based on one of the space capsules that SpaceX launches. They're a big Tesla fan, so we took an old KUKA robot that you see on the right, and it went from green to red. That was a fun one. Painting that, we actually painted that. We have systems at our place of operations that we could paint a car. I can do car level finishes on anything I want to paint, and we painted that. I'm very proud of that piece. It went from green to red, which is a very hard color change to do. On the left is their boardroom. When you walk in, it looks like you're in a Tesla boardroom. And in the center is we wrapped there to keep it private. We wrapped their glass in graphics that were space themed for the SpaceX room. So we have a lot of fun too, even in the corporate arena, not just in the 501c3s. Here's more of it. One of my most favorite projects to do, and I'm looking for a way to do this and get this into a museum somehow. Not necessarily this motif or this theme, but it's a sandblasted glass table top. And what it is, it's a blueprint of the coupe, of the Tesla coupe. I think it's the S. And we were looking for an idea for the bases for this table, for this boardroom table, this meeting table. And it's a 4 foot by 8 foot table. So it's a good sized table, and it's very heavy. The glass is 1 inch thick. And so we came up with a charging station base. So the Tesla charging stations also look like a table base. Perfect. So we actually fabricated those, and it's really one of my favorite pieces to this day. So sharing is teaching is learning. This is something that I used to tell my high school kids in teaching design and teaching, and a lot of the design classes that I taught were revolved around museums, obviously, because that was my passion. Museums actually require high-level design for it to be successful. And again, the sharing is teaching is learning is a great mantra, because as an exhibit designer, as an exhibit builder, my main function is, that is what I do, but our main function is to actually teach. And when we teach, we actually learn. So for example, we just launched Life on Earth, which is a permanent exhibit at Cranbrook. It's in our Wasserman Hall, and it's a biodiversity exhibit, and it's very visually dynamic, I think. And we worked very hard on it. We worked on it during the pandemic closure. We spent a lot of time working on it. I had to work on it out of my garage because we couldn't get into the Institute of Science. The facilities was closed. So we also worked with Zoom and virtually with my team to pull this exhibit together and launch it. Not that far off its originally scheduled date that it was intended to launch. But in doing so, I tell people all the time when I talk about the exhibit that I was never that great a student in high school, and particularly in the and biological sciences, but I could pass a 9th grade biological sciences exam now by producing this exhibit. So I learned a lot doing it. And of course, we teach the general public. And of course, we had consultants and curators that were involved in it as well, not just me. But in working with that, I learned so much. So I'm very blessed in that regard. So if you work in exhibitry, if you work in a museum, you're constantly learning. You're constantly doing things that are going to teach you things, which I'm ever grateful for. And these are some of my kids hard at work helping me with some things, some museum graphics that we did. And this is a shot from, I think, about 2016. So these kids are already, pretty much done with college already. It drives me crazy because it seems like yesterday. Here's a picture of that exhibit that I was talking about, the Life on Earth exhibit. This is the biodiversity casework. These are things that you can't touch, but you can read about. We tried to focus on the really unique aspects of the living world. So you should come down and see it. As a matter of fact, come ask for me at the front desk, and I'll VIP you in, and I'll tour you the exhibit if I'm there. And of course, the never stop learning thing. This is a shot of David Vincenti, one of our carpenters, one of our fabricators at Learning Glass. And my fellows were working at the Flat River Historical Museum. And these guys are, football, sports, and construction, not much in the educational arena, like, yeah, I'll hear about that later. But one of my favorite things that occurred in building this exhibit for the Flat River, renovating their main galleries and their history, is that my guys could tell you all about the history of Greenville. Our trade staff could tell you the birth of the Myers store, the logging that had been done in that area, trains that came in, that it was in fact the potato capital of the world at one time, that it actually rivaled Detroit in its industries. And it was actually a pretty large city on the way up. And then of course its downturn. And so one of the things that I'm thankful for when we work on projects like this is that, this becomes part of us. This we know their history. I could talk for 2 hours about Greenville's history. And I appreciate that fact. And the fact is that I have staff that really say history, and I don't have time for it. And yet when we're done with the project, they can tell you all about Greenville's history. To me, that is just a win. So you never do stop learning. Another thing we're working on for Cranbrook right now is we're developing a climate change exhibit in another one of our galleries. It's to be a permanent exhibit. Right now we call it the Global Climate Change Initiative. And one of the things that we designed that we were looking at was, of course, the hydrogen fuel cell. And how do we make that interesting? And there's a lot of ways to make it interesting. I had no interest in hydrogen fuel cells originally, and now I could tell you all about them, and they're really fascinating. So this is one of our concept sketches for it. This one was way back in my notebook, one of the early concepts. It goes through a lot of iterations before we do our final one. But again, it's a real learning opportunity to work in exhibits. And then of course you combine as much creativity and color as you can and make it dynamic so that other people are interested in it. One of the tricks to being an exhibit designer builder is if you like Halloween, I think you're halfway there. So you saw our pop-up dinosaur crate. That's kind of along that same vein. So if you like Halloween, you might be an exhibits professional. So we just installed at the Belle Isle Aquarium an exhibit that was quite an interesting journey for us. They had a small budget set aside, and what they wanted is to upgrade their electric eel exhibit. Electric eels are really fascinating creatures. They're like a battery. They're a living battery. They store up a charge. That charge, by the way, that zap that they can give you can kill a human being, and it has done so. What we wanted to do is put a what do I want to call, a replica of an electric eel or a couple of electric eels in their habitat that you could touch and get a little buzz from. And so we experimented with cell phone buzzers and piezo buzzers and all different kinds of things to try to replicate a non-painful electric shock. And along the way of developing this, and it goes right up against the wall where the habitat is, where the actual electric eel lives. And we found that the vibration was actually disturbing and was actually translating into the habitat. And also the Belle Isle Aquarium is an architectural treasure, in which case you don't want to drill into all that tile. There's beautiful tile work there, all original, and you don't want to mar it or wreck it, especially if the exhibit's going to run maybe only a couple of years and then you're going to remove it, replace it with something else, or if you're going to move it. You can't drill into the tile. You can't wreck the building. So it was an engineering challenge, number one, that we had to use clamps and non-mechanical attachments to keep it in place for the general public. And then also to prevent the vibration that we actually created, the vibrating system, to not translate into the habitat and upset and disturb the actual electric eel. So in that way, it was a very, very interesting project and we had a lot of fun with it. Here on the left, you see one of our volunteers, Jack Jillian, actually using a rheostat machine to create a finite vibration, one that might feel a little bit like an electric shock, but not actually be an electric shock. And that's what we were doing there. So I posted this on Facebook and some people were mad at me that we were torturing electric eels. To me, that was a real compliment because this is just a carved replica of an electric eel. And if we made you think it was a real eel, we were doing a pretty good job then. My fellows are Max and Dave are installing it actually at the Belle Isle Aquarium. And we found a way to clamp the exhibit module to the railing and then a way to buffer it so that no vibration would translate into the habitat. So in that way, we were actually able to get it done. So it was a real challenge. It was very cool. It was a whole set of engineering challenges that I think we overcame. So that was a fun one to share. Kind of along the same lines as I'd love to put something out in front of my house like that at Halloween. Also, the artistry of exhibits, kind of jumping around here. This is from Doom of the Dinosaurs, Are We Next? This was the dinosaur gallery for that exhibit. It was a larger part of our hall. And we had rented dinosaur skeletons from across the United States and some from Mongolia. And they were shown in the larger part of the hall. And this was actually a entry we created just from odds and ends from around the Institute. So we were actually able to, use LED light strings in a really creative way. PVC sheet, actually hand cut PVC sheet to create that skeleton. And then of course, some leftover Luan to create that box, a very, very monolithic looking box that goes above the two columns, which were left over from the bat zone, which we didn't actually end up having room to store. So all of this unfortunately ended up in the dumpster at the end of the project. But very cool looking, and I'm very proud of this. The look is really dynamic, and it wasn't expensive to do. It's just a very creative and fun project to do. Hence, it's sort of that if you like, Halloween, you might be an exhibits person. Unicorns. I like to talk about unicorns, and then this will probably get us close to wrapping up here. Thank you for listening to me for so long. Unicorn is something that, like, for example, my unicorn is a flying car. When I'm stuck in traffic, I would love nothing more than to buy like a Tesla that has a propeller that would pop out and get me out of traffic and fly me right to my destination in 5 minutes. The next best thing might be a self-driving car. Anyways, to me, that's an impossibility, because think about all the problems that you would have, right? All the uphill battles, like, for example, traffic jams in the sky, that wouldn't be good. Or if you ran out of gas, really not good. So, unicorns we come across also, especially in engineering in our industry, in exhibitry, we come across unicorns all the time. And one of my favorite unicorns is a globe that doesn't have a spindle or a center axis. It's a globe that needs to be face out, where normally you would see South America or the United States, North America, on the globe as it stands to come to a rest. And except that we want to favor, because we're in the penguinarium, we want to favor it to the South Pole or the Antarctic. And it needs to land in a specific place. It can't be on a rod. It needs to be able to rotate all degrees, 360 all the way around, complete rotation. So if you wanted to look at Africa, you could rotate it around and there's Africa. But when you let it go, it's got to rotate back to the South Pole, being front facing forward and upright. And we had to do this. And I call this a unicorn. And it took us 2 years to engineer and build. We had probably more than 8 iterations of globes that are actually, that acrylic globe is hand blown. It is printed flat. The graphics had to be adjusted to print flat, but then when you took that flat sheet, heat formed it or hand blown it in a vacuum former, it would actually come to the right dimensions as a globe, so that it wouldn't look deformed or it wouldn't look distorted. So that had to be done. So there was a whole lot of processes to this. On top of that, there were two halves that had to be joined, because we had to put mechanicals inside the acrylic sphere and maintaining its, graphic continuity. And the fact is that you didn't want to see the seam if you could help it. We didn't really want the general public to see the seam. Hence, we couldn't screw it together. But you have ink on the backside of it that creates the graphics, and you can't put any glue on that. So here are multiple problems that we encounter. And not just this particular project, but many projects are just like that, where you can't have something, but you need something. How can you make this happen? A lot of great minds, no less than 10 people consulted on this, and actually we had a victory. We actually have a globe. I wanted to embed a video of it working, but you can, when the Polk Penguinarium opens back up, hopefully this will still be there. You can go and interact with it. It's on a set of rollers in this column. It free floats on the rollers, but you can't get it out of there. There's enough tolerance where you can't remove the globe, but it's firmly between the two columns, but it rotates freely. It's weighted in such a way, the weight sits on Hawaii, just a little esoteric information for you, that allows it to roll back to Antarctic naturally. So the Antarctic is now face out. What you don't see is the mechanicals of it inside the upper column that has a magnetic arm and brake on it that slowly grabs a magnet glued inside the globe. It grabs that magnet, spins it back around, and then breaks free when the Antarctic gets to the front. So it's an interesting engineering project that we actually pulled off, and I'm very proud of this one. It's a fun one. And it seemed at first like a unicorn. And, I'm surprised that we pulled it off, but we did. And just more shots of development at the Polk Penguinarium, which is an exhibit I'm very, very proud of. Time-wise, how are we doing? I have not been tracking myself.
I think if we can wrap it up in a couple minutes, we'll do a quick Q&A if there are any.
Sounds good. Basically, I'll just say this, and I think we're getting pretty close to the end here, being cognizant of time. I always wanted to build a ship when we built one, at least half of one, on the wall at Cranbrook Institute of Science. This started as the Beagle for a biodiversity exhibit. And we actually took the half mold of the actual ship plans, and we actually modeled it to the plan set. And it was done in 1/4 scale. And then we turned it into the Alvin Clark, which is a famous Michigan shipwreck. So we aged it and turned it from the Beagle to the Alvin Clark. The architecture was a little bit different, but the general public doesn't typically know that. It was more of a decorative element. but I always wanted to do that. So, and then from sailing ships, we build spaceships too. This is a module we built for a company, an engineering company in Troy. That's a autonomous driving vehicle. So it has a kind of a spaceship look to it. So we'll do everything from shipwrecks to spaceships, a lot of that's engineering, so we have to really get into the nitty gritty of designing and making functional. And then of course, we do a lot of shop fabrication. So I spend a lot of times, not sitting in a drafting board drawing fun pictures, but instead going to welding shops and fabricators and sub fabricators, making sure that everything's being built to spec. So just it's a great job and I'm very blessed. So any questions that you may have, I'll take them anytime you want.
Sure. So let's see, Gina did have a question. So all of the projects that you talked about, all the exhibits that you've developed, we're developing over a set period of time. Do you get an upfront budget or a bill at the end?
It depends on the size of the project. There are plenty of projects where we build at the end. It's all individually negotiated. With the Poke Penguinarium, they had a set budget that we tried to keep within. I think we did a pretty good job of doing that for them. Same thing at Cranbrook, we work with budgets mostly, and they're usually stated budgets. And we try to work within those budgets, very cautiously. So yeah, that's a trick sometimes, but yes, good question.
And then most of the other chat messages were, well, a lot of them was me. Penguins are one of my favorite animals, and the Polk Penguinarium is one of my favorite places to be. I haven't gone too many places around the world, but that's one of my favorite places to be. So hearing about how you developed all the exhibits and everything was fascinating. Sue Williams asks, how often are exhibits changed or suggested? I assume at Cranbrook.
It could be anywhere, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
It like anything else, it all does come down to budgets at times. And a lot of times we try to upgrade and update things, without changing the actual spirit of the exhibit. Just you'll see maybe a new item or new implement or new specimen, if we can do that. It does come down to planning and budgets and committees. Larger institutions are a little slower moving to change than smaller groups like yourselves. Cranbrook is making changes. So we've introduced this Life on Earth exhibit, I think just about a year ago it was introduced. And, of course, we've had a lot of closures because of, the pandemic. So it really hasn't hit its stride yet. But on MLK Day, we had quite a large attendance, and I was just absolutely flattered to see that hall was crowded. And I just love that because it had some great visuals. So I was really glad to see that. But yes, that had a stated budget, and we stayed within that budget, in developing these things. And it's, what can you find too? You have to, finding resources for exhibitry is often difficult, and especially depending upon the topic, like somebody wants an exhibit on a blue whale, that'd be great, but where am I going to get a blue whale?
Right.
You have to think very creatively.
Yeah.
So.
I also work at the Henry Ford, not for much longer, but I do work there. And Sue, to your question, we see, like, with the traveling exhibits, the permanent exhibits obviously are permanent for decades, but then the loaned exhibits, at least the larger ones, like about 10 years ago, there was the Titanic exhibit that was there for, a good portion of 2012. I'd say 6-8 months it was there. The Marvel exhibit that came in 2021 was there for 6 months, I think. So I think it's, at least in museums at the scale of the Henry Ford or Cranbrook, it's, at least 6 months for those loaned exhibits.
Yes.
Yeah.
we have a really cool one coming in called Treasure, and that's coming in.
Mhm.
That's what I'll be working with Dan on. We're going to try to bring a cannon in from the Detroit River to that one,
Okay.
and it's a lot of fun. And yeah, you know, 4 to 6 months is a pretty typical run for a rental exhibit.
Mhm.
The fun thing that I have with that, because I'm part of my contract states that I install those exhibits, so I can legitimately say I've installed hundreds of thousands of square feet of exhibitry. So just
Um,
a little bit, you know.
yeah.
So,
And Karen did say she was loving the presentation. She said it was nice to realize how one focus for a career can be part of so many different careers and interesting people.
well,
Um,
it's a
yeah.
culmination for sure. I call it a culminating career because that's really
Mhm.
what it is. Everything. I'm lucky. I'm blessed in that way that things that I've spent my life interested in all kind of collide and come together in one place.
Mhm.
And you know, like I would tell the kids, and Mike Stafford, our director of Cranbrook Institute of Science, his dad said this. You know, the best advice I had ever heard is see if you can find something that you love and make a living at it. And if you can
Mhm.
do that, you'll never go to work. And
Mhm.
I don't think I've been to work yet. So
Yeah. I
say
mean,
it.
when yeah, it's interesting. When I was in grad school, getting my degree in archaeology, um, a lot of my family members thought that I was going to dig up dinosaurs. They thought I was going to be Indiana Jones. They thought I was going to reenact National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, which that's a whole other thing. But you know, you can do that. The funny thing is, you know, while all of those things are wildly inaccurate, it's paints a pretty good picture of the variety that you can get with this degree, with anthropology in general. And Dan can speak to this also. But yeah, it's a multifaceted field.
It is. It's very. It's not boring at all. You know,
No,
I
no,
think
not
people
at
have
all.
that wrong when they have that. That's the thing. I met the fellow that discovered the Titanic, and he was a Navy guy, and I actually paid to have lunch with him at I think the DIA back in the 80s, just after it was found, like in 1986, I think. And what a great, interesting guy. And basically, he said this. He says, "You know what? I'm a scientist. I love science, and I'm not a dork, and I'm not a geek. You know, I'm an interesting guy. So, you know, I came away with the thought that, yeah, you know what? We need to promote that more. That, you know, if you were going to be an engineer, you know, you're not geeky. You're not, you know, it's as important as being a football fan. Come on,
Right.
museums. Go to a museum. We need young people. We need young people for, you know, at Cranbrook we need young people. At the DIA we need young people. At Detroit Historical Society we need young people. You know,
Mhm.
Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society we need young people. Not all about the old people trying to preserve things, you know, and as they get older, perhaps they gain more attention or more attraction to the past. But it would be nice to get younger people involved in this. And how do we do this? That's a challenge, you know. And I think Cranbrook does a great job of promoting programs to get young people in schools and you know, groups like Scouts and stuff. So it's important to get them involved for sure.
Mhm.
That sounds like an opportunity for me to put my 2 cents in.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, guys. You've taken my name in vain far too many times, so I better stick up for myself. So my relationship with Cranbrook goes way, way back, and it doesn't always occur to me how present Cranbrook is in my career as it came to be. And I give credit to the late legendary Walter Nickel, who I believe there's still a bust of him in the main hall. Walter Nickel was the Pied Piper for a bunch of us kids. My parents dragged my brother and I off to all sorts of outdoor programming. We might be out at the crack of dawn, hacking around in a gypsum quarry or a wildlife preserve and so on. This was back in the 1950s, okay? And the seed was planted. It grew slowly, but it never died. And when I found myself in a position where I could kind of indulge myself a little more, when I could see retirement ahead of me, and it was retirement from a job as an academic librarian, which is like being a professional pack rat Trivial Pursuit player. But you know, I always kept my hand in, always kept my interest up, kept, you know, reading, subscribing to, you know, journals and so on. But it kind of crystallized one day. I was in Ann Arbor, one of my alma maters, Oakland being another one, Carl, and Wayne, of course. And I was on my way to the Clements Library, which of course is this wonderful historical library. And I cut through a little shop that I'd gone to a lot when I was a kid, and I saw a refrigerator magnet. So I just had to reach over about a couple of meters, and grab my refrigerator magnet off of my whiteboard. And here's what I found.
Oh, I love that.
Okay, now, and this is a quote from George Eliot, who said it earlier and said it better. My version of that was, it's never too late to be the person you thought you were going to be when you were 10. And so that's what my life has been, is kind of living my life backwards, going back and completing unfinished business. And thanks to collaborators, partners in crime, like Carl, like Joel Stone at the Detroit Historical Society, you guys have been able to make my dreams come true. To get my hands on this stuff, to reunite these things with their stories and so on. And you are such an artist at it. So it's just a real pleasure, you know, letting us peek behind the scenes with you and see how the magic trick happens.
And sometimes that's what it is. Matchsticks, glue, and paper clips, but it's all good. And it's always been fun, Dan. I look forward to working on this next one with you.
It's on.
Absolutely.
Well, we just have had one more comment from Carol, who said, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. Great stories. And she also loves being ADHD as well. So,
all right, there you go.
And oh yeah, Karen mentioned that she thinks your presentation and enthusiasm for your degree and your job would be relevant for high school presentations during career day. That's also something.
I sit on some boards and I try to attend those when I can. I think I have one coming up in April at my old school.
Okay.
None of them will know me now. They're all gone. The ones that knew me are all gone. So, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll take any last minute questions, comments. If you know people that would be interested in this presentation who couldn't attend this morning, it will be going up on YouTube in the relatively near future. Not sure what day yet, but it'll be up in the relatively near future. And both Carl's presentation and the annual meeting presentation, if you're interested. Our next event is tomorrow, January 30th, is our last open house in January. Sue Williams will be there, and as well as Christy Forehand. So stop by, see our new exhibits, have a chat with them. And then we have our strategic planning meetings that start in February on the 9th. And then we also have our open houses once a week in February. Sue Griffer will be with us on February 13th talking about the Toy Hall of Fame. So if you're interested in toys, come in and join us for that. All of this information is on our website, as always. And, if anything goes virtual, again, like the annual meeting, we'll update accordingly. Thank you to Carl. Thank you to Mike for joining us, and congratulations to our awardees, Hannah, Diane, and Mike. And thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
All right. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you for watching. Please support Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society efforts at gwbhs.org. Thank you.